All right. There's a video going around of Johnny Depp kicking cabinets that Amber Heard slyly recorded without him knowing what was going on. So I want to talk about this. And I want to tell a little story to you of what happened for other people that I know, other clients that I've worked with who have had rage after grief. All male clients. So I want to describe what happened. Johnny Depp's mother has died. Amber has been winding him up. There hasn't been empathy about her death. Now, when somebody has died who has been abusive all your life, there is not just pure grief. There is all the rage that you've felt your whole life that you haven't been able to express because you're not able to share that grief with anybody. So it makes sense that he's angry. I want to give you an example of 2 or 3 clients that I've worked with who showed me their rage. So one was not a client, one was a friend. I was 16 years old. Somebody called me and asked if I would go to this house where the dad had died because I would be a calming influence. I went round to the house and I stayed there for a week after the dad had died. The one child, the son, was 17. I was 16, or maybe he was 18. I was 16. And he was furious. And I said to him, here's a chair, smash it. He picked up the chair. People started running to the room. I slammed the door and locked it so nobody could come into the room. And he just began to smash this chair. And I said, you got to get all your anger out, love. Just smash it. And every time he smashed it and looked at me, I said, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. Of course you're mad. Of course you're mad that he's died. Of course you are. And he carried on sharing his anger until this whole chair was just broken, shattered in front of him. And I said to him, I'm so proud of you. And then he collapsed in tears. And I sat there, the 16-year-old me with this incredible human being. I just love him. And I hugged him and held him and rocked him as he sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. That's what Johnny Depp needed. Johnny Depp needed somebody. It makes me so angry that in the face of anger is a stage of grief. And it makes me so angry that in that stage of grief, he is not met. In that stage of grief, he is videoed like he is an abuser rather than met with compassion and empathy, with care, with love, with cherishing. When I was with this friend of mine at 16 and holding him and encouraging him and celebrating him, it meant that he could process the anger that nobody else was allowing him to feel, that he had to look good. He had to smile at guests who were popping round to go, oh, I'm so sorry. No, he needed to process his own stuff. I just shut down the doors and went, no, we're going to stay here in the hallway and you're going to just work through that anger. I'll give you another example. I'm a therapist at the time in a school, and a boy comes in and punches my face. Obviously, as a therapist, this is violating. I'm a young counselor, 21 years old. But I know that anger is a stage of grieving. And so I said to him, what has happened? And he said, the only person who's ever loved me died yesterday. His grandmother had died. And I said to him, let's talk about your anger. He said, nobody else has ever loved me. Nobody else has ever been there except you and her. So I was the one person he could take that out. I said, don't ever hit me again. But you can tell me your anger, but you can't hurt me. I carried on working with him. I didn't say to him that I wouldn't work with him. I carried on working with him. And years later, I bumped into him and he said, you saved my life, because hitting a counselor would have got him into, obviously, like juvenile care. I never reported him. I didn't tell anybody because I knew anger is a stage of grieving. And if I rejected him, and I didn't want to reject him in that anger. I wanted to meet him with the empathy of his grief. And I met it, and I loved him through it, and I empathized, and I set boundaries and said, don't ever do that again. You can use your words, you can't use your fists. And he apologized, and he vowed he would never do that again. Years later, 3 years later, I bump into him in the street, and he just leaps onto me and gives me a hug and says, you turned my life around. He was a drug dealer, drug addict. And he said, I'm totally clean. I haven't had drugs for a year. I'm no longer violent. I have a job. I have my own flat. He came out of an alcoholic and a drug addict family. He had intense abuse at home. But imagine if I had recorded that guy and shown his anger and then gone, he's abusive? No, anger is a stage of grief. And Johnny Depp didn't deserve that violation. He didn't deserve to be shamed in his grief that his mother had just passed away that week. That is just so violating and so cruel. And I just feel utterly, utterly stunned by it. There are so many times that I have seen people who are angry. I remember with one guy who I was dating at the time who had an incident at work where he felt that somebody was going to die and he was petrified, and the police had to get called. And when he came home, he was like stunned and he couldn't speak. And I said, why are you not talking? I got annoyed, and he got angry, and I didn't move away from the door, and he picked up and he broke a chair. And I said, go on, break it fully. Don't stop there. Break the whole thing. Let out your anger. There's nothing wrong with your anger. You're not hurting me. Go ahead. And he smashed the chair, and then he sat down, and I just put my arms around him and I said, I'm here for you. And he's like, why are you like this? And I said, because you are scared, you are hurt, you are angry. It makes sense you're going through this. It's understandable. And he's like, but why are you treating me like my anger's not bad? I said, you are not bad for feeling anger. You just have never been taught how to express it in a healthy way. And I'm here. I'm with you. And he just sat there crying, looking at me going, you know, you're not judging me for your anger. I'm like, why would I judge you? You went through an absolutely excruciating day. He never did that ever in our relationship again. He was not a violent man. But what happened was just an insanely challenging situation. And as men, there has been no education on how to deal with grief or hurt or pain. There has only been repression or saying big boys don't cry, or oh, you're weak, or are you a pussy, or are you a girl every time you cry. And so the only way that men have been taught to express their anger or their hurt or shame or rejection is through anger. That's been an acceptable emotion of men. And we need to, if we want to grow an environment that is not toxic, we need to stop shaming men for their anger, and we need to step into empathy and compassion and supporting them to channel their anger into something else. I was doing a session with somebody this week, a brain spotting session, and they were engulfed by anger, just red in the face, like it was coursing their veins. And we sat with their anger and we explored it and were with it. And underneath their anger, poking our underneath, was trembling fear. And as we explored the fear, the anger disappeared and just shrunk down to nothing. But so often we get scared of the anger, or we shame the anger, or we negate somebody instead of going, this is typical behavior of when somebody has lost a mother who is abusive and toxic. That anger is a way of expressing grief. They don't need somebody shaming them, videoing them, making them wrong. It makes me so angry to see how Johnny Depp is being portrayed as somebody who is like there's something bad about him because he's expressing his anger in that way. He didn't want to hurt anybody. He was doing two things: getting out his anger and trying to numb his anger with alcohol. Why? Because nobody growing up had ever taught him to express his anger in a healthy way, or how to process and manage the anger and be with it, hold space for the anger and see what's wanting to be created out of it. So I'm sorry for my rant, but I needed to express that and champion a healthier way of working with anger. I remember, I used to foster special need teens boys, and one of the boys came home and started smashing his head against the wall. And I stood next to him and I moved my head against the wall, obviously not smashing it like him. And as I did it, I did that to embody what is he feeling, so that I could explain to him what he was going through so that he didn't have to hurt himself. And then as I did it in my body, I could feel what he was feeling in his body. And I turned to him and said, "Oh, frustrating day." And he looked at me and went, "Oh, frustrating. Yes, frustrating day." And then we could talk about what happened in the day. But his emotions were so in him that so some people will self-harm. Some people will throw something. Some people will bash their heads because they just don't know how to deal with emotions. We haven't been taught at school, or if you're in an abusive family, you've not been given somebody who will co-regulate, who will support you with your emotions. So then you do erupt, or you do self-harm because you're trying to control or release that emotion that you just haven't known how to deal with. What we need are lessons. And I do get and feel for Amber that she did not have that training herself. She was not nor was I. She didn't have training in herself of how to hold space for somebody else's emotions because nobody had held space for hers. So she didn't know how to do that. I can get that. I think there's a part of me that just feels that, it was not fair to record it, to share it publicly, to shame him. What he needed at the time was understanding, compassion, and care. And for anybody else who's watching this, I don't advise that with somebody who is abusive. That's your empathy and compassion, or narcissistic, your empathy and compassion will just be suctioned without any care for you. But I don't believe that Johnny is narcissistic or abusive. I feel like he can be toxic in his behaviors at times because he hasn't learned how to deal with his emotions and process them. But I think that deep down, he is such a beautiful human being, and he does not deserve to be shamed like this. So I hope that everybody who judges others with shaming and gossiping and backstabbing people because they are sharing their frustrations, their anger, their hurts in life, that instead of doing that, you learn to hold space for people's pain. You learn to empathize. You learn to validate. You learn to be a loving witness to them so that they are met in their pain without any shame. And then they can process their big grief of their abusive mother dying or abusive father dying, and be met with love and compassion rather than judgment. All right. That's my thoughts on Johnny Depp's raging video. We need more compassion, and we need more skills to be able to relate to anger rather than make it wrong. Sending you all love.